and you're high.
Could you make me a woman?
Honey, I'm so happy.
Picture this. It's 1993. Grunge music is blasting from every radio. Jurassic Park is making kids terrified of theme parks. And somewhere in a San Francisco film studio, a heavy-set Scottish grandmother is terrorizing a kitchen, flinging food at the wall, and absolutely refusing to stop cracking jokes between takes. That grandmother, of course, is not a grandmother at all. She is Robin Williams, one of the most gifted comic performers who ever lived, buried beneath layers of foam latex, padding, and theatrical magic, giving the performance of his life in film that would go on to gross over $441 million worldwide and permanently embed itself into the cultural memory of an entire generation. Mrs. Doubtfire is one of those rare films that manages to be genuinely funny and genuinely heartbreaking at the same time. It makes you laugh until your sides hurt, and then, before you even realize what's happening, it sucker punches you right in the chest with something real and painful and deeply human. It's a film about divorce, about fatherhood, about the desperate things love drives people to do. And it's also a film about a man putting on a dress and pretending to be a Scottish nanny, so there's that too. But here's the thing that most people don't know. The story behind Mrs. Doubtfire is almost as wild as the movie itself. There are secrets hiding beneath those prosthetics, bizarre behind-the-scenes moments, dramatic creative battles, and facts so strange that even the most devoted fans have probably never heard them. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on all of it. These are 15 insane facts you never knew about Mrs. Doubtfire. Let's start with a number that sounds completely made up, but is absolutely true. By the time Mrs. Doubtfire wrapped production, the crew had burned through approximately 2 million feet of raw film stock. To put that into some kind of human perspective, the average Hollywood feature film of that era used somewhere between 100,000 and 400,000 feet of film. Director Chris Columbus and his crew used roughly 5 to 10 times that amount. Why? Because of Robin Williams. Williams was constitutionally incapable of doing just one take and moving on. It simply wasn't in his nature. His brain operated at a frequency that most human beings can't even perceive, a constant roaring torrent of associations, impressions, characters, and jokes that never seemed to switch off. Columbus, wisely, developed a specific method for working with him. Williams would first deliver the scene exactly as scripted, clean, professional, perfectly executed. Columbus would get his safe, take in the can. And then, with the coverage secured, he would essentially open the cage door and let Williams run free. What followed was often extraordinary. Williams would rebuild the scene from scratch on the fly, inventing new characters mid-sentence, switching accents without warning, finding comic angles that no writer could have predicted sitting in a room. Columbus ran as many as 4 cameras simultaneously to try to capture all of it from multiple angles at once, because you could never be certain where Williams was going to go or what he was going to do next. Some scenes went through 15, 18, even 22 consecutive takes, not because anyone made a mistake, but because Williams simply kept generating material. The script supervisor was reportedly reduced to frantic shorthand, scrawling notes as fast as humanly possible, while Williams improvised dialogue at machine gun speed. The result of all this footage was extraordinary in itself. Columbus ended up with enough raw material to assemble 3 completely different versions of the film: a family-friendly PG cut, a PG-13 version, and a more adult-oriented R-rated cut filled with sharper improv and edgier material. All of that footage, all those unused takes and alternate jokes and spontaneous moments of genius, still exists today, preserved in climate-controlled storage facilities, waiting for a world that will probably never get to see most of it. Of all the moments in Mrs. Doubtfire that audiences have quoted and replayed for 3 decades, the melting face scene might be the single most iconic. Mrs. Doubtfire shoves her frosted face into a birthday cake to disguise the fact that she isn't wearing her proper prosthetic mask when the social worker arrives unexpectedly. The icing slides down her face in increasingly grotesque rivers. A blob of frosting drops directly into the social worker's teacup. And then comes the line that sealed the moment in cinematic history. There you go. You've got your cream and your sugar now. Here is what makes that moment even more remarkable. Almost none of it was planned. The script called for Williams to put his face in the cake as a quick disguise gag. Simple enough. But under the intense heat of studio lighting, the frosting behaved in a way that nobody anticipated. It began melting almost immediately, sliding and dripping at a rate far faster than the prop team expected. Williams, completely in character, improvised everything in real time. The The line about cream and sugar came entirely from his own mind in the moment, an instant transformation of a prop disaster into comedy gold. What makes this story genuinely instructive, beyond its entertainment value, is what it reveals about the relationship between preparation and spontaneity in great comedy. Williams had done the prep work. He had lived in that character for months. The prosthetics, the accent, the physicality, all of it was deeply ingrained. So when something unexpected happened, when the frosting started melting and the scene started going sideways, he didn't freeze or panic. He responded. He had the creative reflexes to catch a disaster mid-fall and turn it into something better than what was originally planned. Columbus kept the cameras rolling rather than calling cut, and that decision preserved one of the most quoted lines in the history of 1990 cinema. Between shooting days, Robin Williams had a habit that was equal parts artistic curiosity and personal entertainment. He would leave the studio in full Mrs. Doubtfire costume, the wig, the padding, the prosthetics, the glasses, the whole ensemble, and simply walk around San Francisco to see what would happen. Specifically, he wanted to know whether anyone would recognize him. The answer overwhelmingly was no. The prosthetics team had done their job so well that Williams was essentially invisible even in broad daylight. People walked past him on the street without a second glance. They spoke to him in character, as though he were a slightly eccentric older woman out for a stroll. His own son, when visiting the set, reportedly didn't recognize him until Williams broke character and spoke in his own voice, at which point the disguise completely evaporated because the voice was unmistakably Robin Williams no matter what face was sitting above it. But Williams didn't limit his offset adventures to casual sidewalk strolls. In what has become one of the most entertainingly outrageous behind-the-scenes stories in Hollywood history, he reportedly walked into an adult novelty store in full Mrs. Doubtfire costume. The wig, the glasses, the housecoat, everything. He browsed the store, attempted to make a purchase that he later described in famously colorful terms, and carried on an entire conversation with the shop clerk while maintaining the character completely. It wasn't until he dropped both the costume voice and the accent that the clerk realized they had just been having a conversation with one of the most famous comedians on earth. The resulting laughter, by all accounts, shook the walls. Lisa Jacob was 14 years old when she landed the role of Lydia Hillard, the eldest of the 3 children, in Mrs. Doubtfire. It was a major Hollywood production, a significant opportunity, and by every measure an extraordinary thing to happen to a teenager. Her school, however, did not see it that way. Jacob was a student in Toronto at the time, and she did everything within her power to balance her responsibilities to the production with her academic obligations. She worked with a tutor on set. She completed assignments during breaks in filming. She mailed her schoolwork back home while the production was based in California. By any reasonable standard, she was a dedicated student who happened to be doing something extraordinary with her life simultaneously. But her school operated by a strict attendance policy, and regardless of a reason for her absences, she had missed too many days. When filming wrapped and she attempted to return, she received a letter informing her that she would not be welcomed back. Jacob was devastated. Whatever glamour the Hollywood experience might have carried, losing her sense of normal teenage life, her school, her friends, the ordinary rhythms of adolescence, was genuinely painful. When Robin Williams heard what had happened, he didn't offer sympathy from a distance. He sat down and wrote a personal letter to the school's principal, making a passionate case for Jacob's readmission and arguing that punishing a student for achieving something exceptional was precisely the wrong response to the situation. The principal, unmoved by the argument, reportedly chose to frame the letter and display it in his office rather than act on its contents. Jacob never returned to that school. She later wrote and spoke openly about how much that experience cost her, not in professional terms, but in the simpler, more human terms of belonging and normalcy. The role opened doors. It also closed one that mattered to her in ways that fame doesn't easily replace. The very first images audiences see in Mrs. Doubtfire are not Robin Williams or Sally Field or Pierce Brosnan. They are an animated cartoon featuring a bird named Pudgy the Parakeet and a cat named Grunge, a brief, delightful sequence that establishes Daniel Hillard's work as a voice actor before the live-action story begins. That cartoon was not cobbled together from stock animation or farmed out to a generic production house. It was created by Chuck Jones. If that name doesn't immediately ring every bell it should, here is the context. Chuck Jones was one of the most significant figures in the entire history of animation. He directed over 300 cartoon shorts across his career. He created or co-created some of the most beloved animated characters of the 20th century: Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Elmer Fudd, Tweety, Porky Pig, The Roadrunner, and Coyote. He directed What's Opera, Doc? And Duck-a-Muck, two animated shorts that the American Film Institute has recognized among the greatest films ever made in any form. He was not a name you associated with a brief opening sequence in a live-action family comedy. But Chris Columbus wanted something special, and Jones assembled a team of remarkable collaborators to create it. Among them was Eric Goldberg, who was simultaneously working on the animated sequences for Aladdin, also featuring Robin Williams as the voice of the genie, a coincidence that feels almost too neat to be true. The team produced nearly 5 full minutes of cartoon footage for the opening sequence, most of which was ultimately cut down for pacing. The extended version has appeared in bonus materials over the years. The sequence accomplishes something elegant in the final film. It introduces Daniel's character through action rather than exposition, showing us immediately that he is a man of strong moral convictions and terrible practical judgment. He refuses to voice a cartoon bird that is shown smoking a cigarette, and in doing so, loses his job on the spot. The transformation from Robin Williams to Mrs. Doubtfire was not a matter of putting on a dress and slapping on some powder. It was a 4 to 4.5 hour daily ordeal conducted by a dedicated team of makeup and prosthetics artists that involved 8 separate pieces of foam latex applied to Williams's face and blended together with extraordinary precision. Each piece had to align perfectly with the others, and the seams had to be invisible not just in person, but under the merciless magnification of high-definition studio cameras. After the facial prosthetics came the full body padding, a suit that transformed Williams's male silhouette into something convincingly matronly, along with the wig, the costume, and multiple layers of stippled paint applied to create realistic skin texture, age spots, and the general visual impression of a woman several decades older than Williams actually was. For most of the application process, Williams had to sit still with his head tilted back while the makeup team worked around him. To make this bearable, the production installed a television set on the ceiling above his makeup chair so that he could watch films while the work was being done. Even so, 4+ hours of enforced relative stillness every single morning, repeated across months of production, was a significant physical and mental tax. Williams was also known to perspire heavily under performance conditions, which created a specific technical challenge. If the prosthetics weren't perfectly sealed, the heat and moisture generated under studio lights would begin breaking them down from the inside. The makeup team had to be vigilant about this throughout every shooting day. Despite all of these challenges, their work was recognized at the highest level. The team won the Academy Award for Best Makeup at the 1994 ceremony, a thoroughly deserved honor for an extraordinary technical achievement. The ending of Mrs. Doubtfire, which sees Daniel and Miranda remain divorced, co-parenting their children with hard-won mutual respect rather than reuniting as a couple, is one of the things that makes the film genuinely unusual among mainstream Hollywood family comedies of the 1990s. It's an honest ending. A mature ending. An ending that says something true about how families actually work rather than offering audiences a reassuring fantasy. And it almost didn't exist. The original screenplay by Randy Mayhem Singer concluded exactly as the finished film does. The marriage stays ended, but the parental relationship finds a new and functional form. That was the story Singer wanted to tell, and it was the story that resonated most deeply with the creative team attached to the production. But 20th Century Fox pushed hard for something more conventional, a reconciliation, restored family unit, the kind of tidy resolution that studios in that era believed audiences demanded from family films. The resistance to that push was fierce and came from multiple directions simultaneously. Columbus was divorced. Sally Field was divorced. Several key members of the cast and crew had personal experience with exactly the kind of family situation the film was depicting, and they felt strongly that sending children the message that divorced parents inevitably reunite if everyone just tries hard enough was not only narratively dishonest, but potentially damaging. Williams was particularly vocal in his opposition. The studio briefly brought in another writer to reshape the ending towards something more palatable by their standards, but the creative team held firm, and eventually the studio backed down. The final scene, in which Mrs. Doubtfire speaks directly into the camera, addressing children who come from all different kinds of families, exists because of that fight. It is one of the most quietly powerful moments in the film, and it would not exist if the studio had gotten its way. Today, Stu Dunmere, the wealthy, handsome, emotionally stable man who begins dating Miranda after the divorce, is one of the film's more interesting and underappreciated characters. He is kind. He is patient with the children. He is, in almost every measurable way, a better immediate domestic presence than Daniel. That contrast is part of what makes Daniel's jealousy so complex and sympathetic. He isn't competing with a monster. He's competing with a decent person and losing, and that forces him to look inward rather than outward for the source of his problems. This was not how Stu was originally conceived. In earlier drafts of the screenplay, Stu was written as an unambiguous antagonist, scheming, manipulative, willing to plot against Daniel, and pushed to have his children sent to boarding school in order to clear the path to Miranda. He was designed to be easy to hate, a convenient external villain against whom Daniel could triumph. Columbus rejected this approach, recognizing that it fundamentally misunderstood what the film was supposed to be about. Mrs. Doubtfire is not a story about defeating a bad guy. It's a story about a flawed man confronting the consequences of his own choices. If Stu is the villain, Daniel's journey becomes about beating an enemy. If Stu is a good person, Daniel's journey becomes about becoming a better version of himself, which is far more interesting and far more honest. The character was completely rewritten. The only surviving trace of the original villain version is a single line in the pool scene where Stu calls Daniel a loser, a sharp, slightly out-of-character moment that was apparently retained from an earlier draft and never smoothed away. A deleted scene in which Daniel apologizes to Stu for his behavior was filmed but ultimately cut from the final version of the film. Some of the most revealing things about a person's character happen not in their professional work but in the quiet moments around it. This is a story about one of those moments. While the production was filming the emotionally intense courtroom custody sequence, Sally Field received word that her father had died, a sudden, devastating loss in the middle of an already demanding stretch of work. Field, demonstrating the kind of stoic professionalism that long careers sometimes instill, initially attempted to continue. She returned to set. She tried to push through. She was determined not to disrupt the schedule or create problems for the production. Robin Williams noticed immediately that something was wrong. He had that quality, that radar for other people's emotional states that some people possess, and most don't. When Field told him what had happened, he didn't offer condolences and suggest she take a few minutes. He went directly to Chris Columbus, and exercising the authority he held as both the film's star and one of its producers, stopped filming altogether. The schedule was rearranged on the spot. Field was released to be with her family. She has spoken about this in interviews over the years with evident emotion, describing Williams as someone who didn't just notice when people were hurting, but actually did something about it. In an industry that runs on money and momentum, and the constant pressure to keep shooting, the willingness to simply stop, to say